How many women would be willing to do something like this? Hand the husband she'd lived with for nearly 40 years over to another woman. Not because the love had faded, not because of betrayal. In this story, there's no villain at all. That woman simply believed he deserved to live out his final years with dignity. But what happened decades earlier that made a decision like that feel inevitable, and why, when she died quietly, in near total obscurity, did an entire other nation stop to mourn her? Nearly 40 years with her Japanese husband. A Russian wife lets him go, to reunite with a first wife everyone thought had died. It all started before World War II, when Yasaburo Hachiya, son of a well-off Japanese family, left his homeland with his young wife Hisako, chasing a better life on the Korean peninsula. There, they had 2 children, a son and a daughter. Then the war changed everything. In 1945, as the Soviet Red Army swept into the region, Japanese civilians were rounded up en masse, accused of being spies. Yasaburo was one of them. He was sent to a Stalinist gulag camp in Magadan, in the far eastern edges of Siberia, sentenced to 10 years. By the time he was finally released, officials had somehow left his name off the list of prisoners cleared to go home. As the years piled up, Yasaburo came to believe his wife and children were probably dead, and he was terrified, honestly, of what waited for him back in Japan after so many years inside the Soviet Union. So he made a choice. He'd start over. He took Soviet citizenship and a new name, Yakov Ivanovich, Yasha, to the people who knew him. Love, born out of shared pain. In 1959, Yasaburo met a woman named Klavdia Leonidovna Novikova, and the 2 of them had exactly one thing in common. They'd both survived Stalin's camps. Klavdia had been sentenced to 7 years for the crime of squandering socialist property. "I went through hell," she said once, "but I didn't break. I never even said an obscene word. That camp ruined plenty of women. It's terrifying just remembering it. The most important thing, to me, was keeping my soul intact." Before her arrest, records show, Klavdia had already been married, with a son. What became of that son afterward, nobody really knows. It disappears from the record. Her husband, meanwhile, had remarried while she was still locked away. She met Yasaburo by chance, in a resettlement camp in Bryansk, and something in her ached for him immediately. "I saw Yasha," she recalled. His face wasn't Russian. He was thin, worn down, and there was so much pain in his eyes, it hurt just to look at him. Still, they didn't rush into anything. She was wary, at first, of getting close to a man who'd been imprisoned for supposed espionage against the Soviet state, even though she believed, deep down, that he was innocent. It wasn't until the early 1960s, after she'd relocated to a small settlement called Progress, out in Russia's Far East, that he finally wrote to her, told her he wanted to come be with her. She said no, out of fear. "I only ever told one close friend," she admitted, "that I was writing letters to a former prisoner of war. But the feeling was too strong for either of them to ignore." Yasaburo crossed 6 time zones, the length of half a continent, just to reach her. His devotion won her over. She agreed to be his wife. And for nearly 40 years, they lived happily together. He worked as a barber, a photographer, and even practiced acupuncture on the side. They grew tomatoes and cucumbers, kept a goat, tended a hive of bees. He never once raised his voice at her. His only real regret, he'd say, was that they never had children of their own. "There wasn't a second man like him in the whole region," Klavdia used to say. "The other women in the village were jealous of me. He didn't drink, didn't smoke. Yasaburo even bought 2 coffins, years in advance, and stored them up in the attic, quietly hoping that if the day ever came, they'd both go together." Meanwhile, half a world away, his first wife had been waiting 51 years, without ever remarrying. After the Soviet Union collapsed, a local resident happened to mention, to a Japanese business contact that there was an old Japanese man living out in that region who'd been there for decades. That businessman went home to Japan and started asking around. What they found stunned everyone: Yasaburo's younger brother, his daughter, and eventually his first wife, Hisako, all still alive, all long since returned to Japan. Only his son had died, back in Korea, during the chaos of the war. When Yasaburo had been taken away, Hisako made her way back to Japan with their daughter, Kumiko, and worked as a nurse to keep them both afloat. For decades, she scraped together every yen of her modest salary, building a small house, one she registered under her missing husband's name in her own savings account, never once certain if he was even still alive. Learning his first wife had survived, had waited for him faithfully for 51 years, turned Yasaburo's entire world upside down. His daughter and brother traveled all the way out to the village of Progress to find him, to convince him to come home to the woman who'd endured so much, waiting. Yasaburo said no. I can't leave her, he told them, meaning Klavdia. She's everything to me. Klavdia was heartbroken, but she still pushed her husband to go. Hisako, she reminded him, had given up her entire youth waiting for him. And with his health starting to fail, he'd get far better care in Japan than out here. So, against her own husband's wishes, Klavdia took matters into her own hands. She arranged his exit visa herself, withdrew their savings, converted every ruble to dollars, bought his plane ticket, covered his living expenses. And then she divorced him, quietly, so he'd be entitled to a pension in Japan and full rights to property and inheritance there. Faced with everyone urging him and Klavdia's own unshakable resolve, Yasaburo finally, reluctantly, agreed to go. The farewell kiss. In March of 1997, the day arrived. Amid snow that still hadn't melted, Klavdia kissed her husband goodbye one final time, holding him close. His wife needs to hold him again before either of them dies, she said. My heart is torn in two, letting him go. But nobody's to blame here. It's fate. What matters is that he'll live better there. He's suffered enough. He probably wouldn't have survived out here much longer. After Yasaburo returned to Japan and reunited with Hisako, he never stopped thinking of Klavdia. He sent her small gifts, called her, without fail, every single Saturday, kept begging her to come visit, telling her how much he missed her. Their story became well known across Japan. A Japanese writer wrote a book about the two of them. Journalists made a documentary. Klavdia was celebrated for her selflessness, and the Japanese public organized a fundraiser, an entire prefecture pitching in, just to cover the cost of flying her out to see him. She finally made the trip, past 80 years old by then. The two wives met, embraced, and cried together. No jealousy between them, no blame. They didn't need a shared language to understand exactly what the other was feeling. Klavdia went back to Japan 2 more times after that. On her final visit, she even attended the premiere of a stage play, written about her and Yasaburo's story. Both Yasaburo and Hisako begged her to stay in Japan for good. She always said no. Sometime later, Hisako passed away. After the funeral, Yasaburo begged Klavdia again, either move to Japan and live with him, or he'd go back to Progress himself, to spend whatever years he had left by her side. She refused. Again. She told him she wanted him living out his final years in Japan, with dignity. A quiet death. A nation in mourning. Klavdia Leonidovna Novikova passed away in September of 2014, alone, at 94 years old. Only a handful of people showed up to her funeral. Almost everyone from her life, family, friends, had already passed on before her. In Japan, though, the major television networks covered her death extensively. Headlines simply read, "The Russian wife of Yasaburo Hachiya has died." Not long after, a letter arrived in the village of Progress. From Yasaburo, he knew she'd never be able to read it, but it was something he needed to write anyway. Klavdia, when I learned you had passed, grief overwhelmed my heart. I tried calling you on August 20th, my 96th birthday, and couldn't get through. For 40 years we lived together in Russia. You were always by my side, always supporting me. Thank you for everything. I was only able to return to Japan because of you, and I am endlessly grateful. I remember how we even kept 2 coffins ready, one for each of us. If I could, I would rush to your side right now and hold you tight in my arms, but I'm powerless to do that now. Rest in peace, my beloved Klavdia, your Yasaburo.